Good afternoon, it's a pleasure to be here. Last year, Naim Kapuku from, let's see, where is he at again? University of Central Florida asked a number of people if they wanted to contribute to a panel at ASPA mid-March titled 75 Years of Public Administration Research and Professional Relevance. Now that last one, professional relevance, really wild, assuming that we can make a case that 75 years of research have been professionally relevant or relevant to public administration professionals. From the little research that has been done on that, I can tell you that less than 2% of the public servants do consult scholarly journals in the area that they work in. I'm not so sure if we do a survey of what research has actually been used that was published in PAR, that we might be more disappointed than we even realize. Nevertheless, I wrote a paper, and in this paper about inter and A-Disciplinary study for professionals, I was thinking, what does it mean if we're public administration professionals for the curriculum, and for how we teach and what it is that we teach. I start with some basic assumptions, right? This is, by the way, to my embarrassment, the first PowerPoint I put together ever, thanks to Alex, who helped me with that this morning. So there you go. But now I know, and I will use it more, I suspect. Okay, apart from two basic assumptions, and I need to add that I asked about a month ago if Travis Wetzel would like to be the co-author on the paper, because he had a number of good ideas, and he can tinker with all sorts of graphics. So we're co-authoring a paper that we're sending off after the conference. Two basic assumptions I depart from. First is, or we depart from, is that government is the only institutional actor left that can make binding decisions on behalf of a population as a whole. There's no other social institution that has the authority to do that. And the second assumption, we're all familiar with Eaton's politics, is the authoritative allocation of values. I'll throw in the mix that administration is as much, if not even more so, involved in the allocation of values. So that's what I'm departing from, and that's what we'll get back to now. Another element that people don't often realize, and we tend to live in the present, don't think too much about the past, but that the government we understand, or we think we understand, and we live with and interact with on a daily basis, is only about 200 years old. Yeah? For the bulk of human history, so that is what, 8,000, 10,000 years, take your pick. For as long as we live in sedentary societies, this kind of government did not exist. Governments were, how do you say that? Asimoglu and Robinson had it in 2012, their big book. They were not inclusive. They withdrew resources from people. Right now, we may not always find it to be the case, but at least in terms of political theory, citizens own government. Government is us, Camilla Stivers and Cheryl King. Now, as a field of study, we claim, or I claimed earlier in 2011, public administration is an umbrella study. And an umbrella study is one that doesn't only draw upon disciplinary sources of knowledge and information, but upon other sources as well, and I will have a slide for that later on. Let me get to, briefly, foundations of modern government. I said that government today is entirely different than anything that ever existed government-wise before the 18th century. Now I hope that someone is going to try me on that one, because I don't think this can be, what do you say that, disproven. What changed? First, in terms of foundations, and I'll distinguish between constitutional, organizational, individual level of the office holder, from the late 18th century on, and it happened in a span of a few decades. I'm not going to go into the explanation of it, because that is a very complex explanation, but at the constitutional level, we see a separation of public and private spheres of life that we think about is totally normal. Well, it isn't. Separation of church and state, in preparation since the 12th century, but not something that was codified in law until the late 18th, and that is then done in constitutions consecutively. In the American Constitution of 89, the French of 91, and the Dutch in 1798. Separation of politics and administration, we're quite familiar with that. I think it has something to do with Frank Goodnow, but it is actually something that dates back to the late 18th century. Separation of office and office holder. If I would like to sell my job, as I could have 5 centuries ago, to say, you can pay me enough money, I don't think I can do that now. Nor can I pass my job off to my 3-year-old kid and get another job. I have examples of this, that this happened. 3-year-old kids holding public office. Departmentalization, we have departments of defense, departments of energy, take your pick. It is basically a late 18th century thing. Now, this one at the individual level of office holders, people didn't work in government full time. It was a 1-2 day a week job. So you had to have other jobs. Problem is that if you wear multiple hats, you can actually sell from one hat to the other, which happens. So if you worked in the public sector, but you also had a lumberyard, of course, if you could commission the building of a public school, then you would commission yourself as the lumberjack to provide the lumber. Right? So adequate salary and pension in money is very, very important. It was established again roughly between 1810 and 1825. We know this for a fact. Governments negotiating with one another and finally figuring out that the pension age would be 65, which was roughly 20 years longer than the average lifespan in the early 19th century. I think we have to catch up with that one a little bit. Huh? Now this one is key for the presentation today, appropriate educational background and experience, because I'm going to question whether we provide the appropriate educational background for our public service professionals. So this changed late 18th century then. The students will be familiar with this, what I call the triple whammy, happening within a span of decades: industrialization, urbanization, and rapid population growth. I'm not going to go into the reasons for that. Again, it's quite complex, but people at the time realized that something was happening. They literally felt, the way Durkheim called it, alienated from the kind of work that they did. Where in the medieval guild, you would work from the raw product to the end product. Industrialization made that you only were involved in one step of the product. So there was no ownership of the job anymore. And most jobs were labor, manual labor, craftsmanship stuff. Now, so how do people express that they are not quite sure what is going on in this world, and that the world is rapidly changing? Well, Max Weber, thinking, wow, we have bureaucracy, and it seems to be swelling quite a bit in response to people's needs in urban areas, and there's ample testimony to that. So Max Weber thinking, wow, we have bureaucracy, it's growing and growing, and it's going to overpower democracy. How on earth can we stop this thing? And he wrote about the inexorable march forward of bureaucracy. I think we can put Max Weber's concerns to rest, but maybe I can, and I'd like to hear others about that. The German-born journalist Mencken, and how he wrote about bureaucracy. Yeah? Franz Kafka, we've all heard of Kafka, The Castle and the Trial. And then, of course, I don't think anybody has heard of this, that there's actually a piano piece, it's about 5 minutes long, by Erik Satie. But you have to download it, and when you download the music, you will get Erik Satie's notes, because he has for each series of bars some quotations of a public servant. The public servant that he imagines and how he's going to work. It's kind of a fun piece to listen to, and if you play piano, it is, I think, quite a challenge to play it, because unlike Erik Satie's Zeg Nosjen or Gymnopédie, this one is kind of like that, very fast. Now, what do people do in response to this rapidly growing government? So governments grow in the context of industrialization, urbanization, and rapid population growth. When people move to the cities, they no longer live in an area where you know everybody else, and where when you're pregnant, you'll get food more than you can swallow, you'll probably have to throw it away. In urban areas, who's going to take care of you? Not your neighbors, because you don't know anybody anymore. So you turn to who? Government. Imagine that you're a city manager in the 1880s. Whether you're in Europe or in the United States, it doesn't really matter. It was the same everywhere. And you're being assailed with letters from people in your town. Can you do this? Can you do that? Yeah? And it doesn't stop at potholes. They want sewage, they want running water, they want gas, they want decent, halfway decent housing. Yeah? So these people were flooded with requests, doing something, make the living conditions a little better. What happens at that time, at the same time, is that the response in especially higher education is to provide programs, and these public servants, these city managers, Brownlow was one of them, yeah, Willie Brownlow, responded themselves by developing training programs for people, for their own employees, helping them how to deal with this. Yeah? A little strategic planning avant la lettre. Now, so we see higher education picking up all sorts of new programs, starting new programs, psychology, political science, economics. They emerged, they didn't exist prior to that time as a curriculum in a university. So we are finally getting late 19th, early 20th century people working in government who actually were trained in something that is relevant to the policy area where they were going to work. Yeah? Now, these public administration professionals were considered experts. You were an expert in agriculture or in education or in healthcare. Take your pick. Yeah? And increasingly people believed that we should leave to experts the making of policy, because experts, after all, know more about, say, milk than I do. Yeah? So if you wanted to legislate something, secondary legislation usually, about milk, the composition of milk, then you had to study dairy studies or whatever, agriculture. So government is filled with professionals who have some kind of specialist training. As was quoted in the New York Times in December, John Dewey, Woodrow Wilson, and Justice Brandeis believed, and I quote, that the modern industrial society had grown too complex for the common citizen or the average elected officials. In other words, leave it to the experts. And here we have a quote from President Kennedy at a news conference in 1962. And here, most of the problems that we now face are technical problems, are administrative problems, yeah? Needing the kind of judgment that we common folk, and when it comes to most administrative decisions, I'm as common as anybody, right? Leave it to the experts. Are public problems, however, really so simple that we can only leave it to the experts? Let's just take a look. This is from an article in Foster, 1982. See, we have simple and clear problems, and then we have the expert knowledge available. This is, yeah, it's hard to read, but I couldn't enlarge it. That's my lack of experience with PowerPoint. This is the kind of simple problem, I suppose, that Kennedy talks about. Well, if we're talking about wicked problems here, where we have uncertain or conflicting goals, and where we are not certain about the kind of knowledge we can tap into, these are not just technical and administrative matters, these concern all of us. Let's look at another table, and this comes out of a book that was, one of the co-authors was Anand, over there. Here, if we have a well-developed state of knowledge about a particular area, yeah, and if we agree on what that knowledge means to us, then, but if we don't, then that is definitely not an administrative or technical problem. Now, when are public problems wicked? And we go as far as saying that all public problems are wicked. Now, I know that Microsoft deals with wicked problems too, but the nature of their wicked problems does not potentially include the entire population. Problems are wicked when they can be considered from a variety of angles. That is, ontological angles, different perceptions of reality as something that is immanent or transcendent, and static versus dynamic. when there are various disciplinary angles, when there are various axiological angles, I'll get to that, and when there are various ideological angles. They are wicked when there are many stakeholders involved who perceive the particular public problem from their own various different angles. Problems are wicked when they can be addressed through a multitude of different skills and instruments, and that is why I call it the triple whammy at the end of the 18th century. They are wicked when there is no clear historical precedent that you can operate upon. Now, people complain about governments. I come from a rather strong state tradition, the Netherlands, and people do distrust government increasingly, just as here, past 40 years. But since the 1880s, I don't think there is an historical precedent that we can fall back upon. I have Googled last week for something else that I'm working on. Big data, the number of conferences at the moment is spouting out of the faucet really fast. But when you look at what people actually say, what big data mean for policy making, it's something that David is looking into or thinking about. We haven't quite figured it out yet. And 30 years ago, public servants didn't have to deal with big data, at least not in the way that we have to nowadays. No. I argue that disciplinary knowledge that people have been falling back upon for more than a century, disciplinary knowledge is the stuff that you get in a higher education degree. Right? The disciplinary knowledge is not enough when we're dealing with public problems. The disciplinary knowledge is one side of an arena of bodies of knowledge from which we draw. We draw as much, and any civil servant, when I've talked with them, here in the United States or back in the Netherlands, well in Europe actually, will say that this is the case, and actually you know it, because you study org theory among other things. Huh? We draw upon organizational knowledge just as much. Not just the knowledge that we can get from books and from articles, from academic disciplines, but what organizations expect from us. That's something that is wired in our brain as well. We act upon them. Societal knowledge is the kind of knowledge that concerns shared values. Yeah? And societal knowledge, little story. I was 10 years old. I grew up in a labor class neighborhood in The Hague that was all white. This is in 1968 and before. In 1973, when my brother went to the same school, it was half colored, mostly from Turkey, Morocco, and then Suriname, the northern part there in Latin America. Yeah? We no longer, and that is pretty important to think about, we no longer live in homogeneous societies. And as a consequence, we no longer can assume that we depart from one stable, recognizable cultural foundation. So there's societal knowledge, and then finally personal knowledge is everything you grew up with, religiously, politically, life experiences that you've had wherever you went to school. I'll always be a hardwired Dutchman, yeah, because I have lived most of my life over there. You're Americans because you have lived over here. Now, what does this mean for public administration professionals and for pedagogy? How do we teach public administration? For that, I have collected a number of quotes on a variety of different issues, but as you'll see, they're all related. First, when we collect knowledge, we do that on the basis developed in the course of the 18th century of scientific inquiry. And this quote by Commercial says it pretty much. We're interested in the discovery of laws rather than in the welfare of society. You could argue the statement, but I like to have some provocative statements because there is something to this. Yeah? Especially if we treat public policy making as something that can be done along disciplinary lines, that is scientifically objective, independent of the observer. Dream on. Now, academia is still very much organized along disciplinary lines. We focus on research, and research with an emphasis on science narrowly defined. Yeah? Public administration in the United States is a string of specializations, as said Sifin in the University in the 1950s, but that is the case in Europe as well, although it is less visible in the textbooks. Many programs emphasize qualitative skills and methods, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we cite it with other types of information as well. I'll get to this.
And that is an ontological question. Yeah? We don't train or educate, I'd rather say, our students, whether they are pre-entry or mid-career, to think about the nature of public problems. Yeah? And if we do, we like to think that we do that as something that's independent from choices and interests that we have. How do I define the nature of a problem given my own lived experience, education and training? And for those of you who come to class when I'm teaching, it is clear pretty much that I'm very, very Dutch in a number of ways that I look at the social reality in this country. I see things about my own country that I didn't see when I was living there. Yeah? Now, how does the policy... Oh yeah, so by what criteria do I justify evidence, knowledge and beliefs? And those are questions of epistemology. Yeah? And then finally, how can policy choices that we make be legitimated? Of course, that's axiology, the study of values, right? Now, we can really not expect public administrators, when they're confronted with problems that we like them to solve yesterday, to sit back and say, okay, this is a really big deal, say, huge epidemic. Let's think about this for at least 2 weeks. Can't do that. We have to respond fast. But at least when we're being educated, and I prefer that word over the word training, we can actually learn to think about problems from ontological, epistemological and axiological angles. Yeah? And then what we do, ontology is the nature of reality, axiology is values, right? So what we do actually in our education is focus on methodology, and maybe we'll get to epistemology. That's not how it should be. We think this is how it should be. Ontology and axiology both influence epistemology, and that in turn influences methodology. Yeah? But we cannot think about methodology as something that is separate from those other three. Well, that's the whole point. But hang on, I have more quotes. So first was how we look at education, our heritage of the Enlightenment. Here's a second. It's a little more difficult to read, but all four here, Charles Merriam, Herbert Simon, Marshall Dimmock, and Dwight Walder, they all agree that if we want to have professional public administrators, they need as broad an education as you can imagine. Yeah? So what is that kind of a broad education? You might argue we have a public administration curriculum. In most cases in the United States, it's taught at a graduate level. So your more general cultural background you'll get in your gen ed. And hopefully your parents threw in some music as you were getting older and took you to museums or something so that you are sort of a rounded out individual. But that's not how it works, right? We can have education in the broader field of the social sciences in a public administration curriculum. How broad-based is our curriculum? Or do we, yeah. So PA curricula are generally very much hands-on, focused on specific skills, budgeting and finance, program eval, research design, human resource management, writing policy briefs. It's all important. You will not hear me argue that it's not. Yeah? But if you sort of close down an entire program without any opportunity to add or change things in a program to make it better or more well-rounded, I think we have hammered shut our graduate program. And we teach subject matters, organization theory, decision-making theory, policy-making process, but we have not much attention for, let's call it philosophical and historical knowledge. Another set of quotes, that we need specialists in generalism, whatever that may be. I really don't know how you could educate for that when you think about it, but, hang on. You should think of that cube that I showed earlier, or that arena with those 4 sides. We do not only educate people in disciplinary knowledge, but should also pay attention to organizational knowledge and background, social, the nature of society in which we live, and then personal background that people bring in. Nothing new. Lindblom called it partisan analysis, yeah, in a little book in 1979. Now here, specialists, yeah, we need specialists in generalism. And we need specialists in generalism, and then not so much in terms of American Government 101, but in terms of understanding living in a multicultural society where people have very, very different backgrounds. And just as important as it is to build an ethical community on a basis that we actually all can share, and that basis is the fact that we're citizens. And this article, Ethical Community by Terry Cooper, prize-winning ARPA 2012, a really good piece. We not only need to build ethical communities, hard enough as it is, we also need to build confidence in how we confront moral issues and learning how to make ethical decisions. Now you can download it. The Department of Defense has a decision tree to help you as a civilian or military official in the Pentagon make ethical decisions. But ethical decisions is more than just a decision tree. It is also education in integrity, something that I wrote about in PAR in 2004. Now, what kind of a professional is that is able to confront moral issues without being afraid of it? There you go. They need to have wisdom, right? And I really like this quote by E.O. Wilson, how the entomologist, right? And I have this quote is in Consilience, that book in 1998 by him, how we're drowning in information but starving for wisdom. And again, he's not the only one who says that. Hodgkinson is another. Yeah? And it is easy to find other authors who said that. But we not only need knowledge and cleverness and expertise, we need wisdom just as much. Now, what is it that public servants act upon? Here we go. The argument has been made by a number of people that civil servants, that civil servants try to avoid moral debate like the plague. Hodgkinson argues that they try to, and he's a philosopher, they try to solve public problems at the lowest possible level. If it can be only technical, then that's what they will try. But moral discussions they like to avoid, if only because then the idea is upheld that the value-making, the value-laden decisions are for politics, the administrations do the technical implementation stuff. So here, Dimmock, now yeah, I'll let it speak for itself. We don't want to be offensively moral, apparently. And then there's Lou Gothrop, who argues that public servants, the generation now, that was raised in, say, the 1980s, has little understanding of the ethical, moral foundations upon which they act. I have looked for empirical evidence of this. I don't know if there is any evidence that public servants nowadays lack that type of more understanding of moral and ethical issues. But it is definitely something that's in the back of my mind that I would like to do. J.Q. Wilson, who died, 2 years ago, said the same thing, noting that people in his presidential speech as chairman of, or president of the American Political Science Association, that we live in an age where people are reluctant to speak openly about morality. And Hodgkinson argued that civil servants have a natural tendency to solve conflicts at the lowest possible level, avoiding moral deliberations. And for that, I found empirical evidence, published it in 2004. The civil servants we interviewed, Amy Franklin and I, they first rely on formal guidelines, that is law, the political platform, or whoever is elected, and then budgetary procedures. If these fail, that they cannot find a legitimation for actions in those, then they'll move to individual appreciation of managerial, legal, and political constraints. This is basically organizational knowledge, right? And then finally, individual morality. But that really is the last resort. Now, that's the slideshow. I thought, oh yeah, I had them all in. Okay, so what can we do in a curriculum to help people learn how you can deal with moral and ethical challenges? There was an article in the American Political Science Review in 1957, a guy called Schubert. I stumbled upon it by accident last week. How can a civil servant determine to which voice or voices to listen when having to make policy decisions? If we pretend that knowledge is objective and that it is gathered outside ourselves, then there is not a problem. But with a society, in a society with so many different people, so many different opinions, we actually need that education kind of badly. I think we should consider a philosophy of sciences class. I had that. It was a standard part in the history curriculum. As far as I know, most programs have a philosophy of sciences. I don't know whether professional schools do that or not. I didn't look into that. But philosophy of social science would help students understand a little better that there is more to decision making than just a particular method or defining a problem in one particular way. And then I think also we need to infuse in our curriculum in some way or other attention for morality, ethics and culture. Public decision making in the United States is really very different from how it is done in Sweden or in France or in the Netherlands or take your pick, Vanuatu. Maybe there's more room for this in the undergraduate curriculum. I think it's important, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. It's more something for us all to consider when we're moving forward as a Glen School. Final thing, and that's why I asked Travis to come in as co-author, is that we were talking in my office and he was scribbling some notes, and he said, well, basically, we're discipline agnostic, right? So maybe A-Disciplinarity is being agnostic about what disciplines we draw on. We define public problems based on the nature of that problem, and we draw upon whatever knowledge source we deem reasonable, important. And that goes way beyond disciplinary knowledge. Neil asked about transdisciplinary knowledge. That is knowledge overarching. Maybe that is close to that notion of an umbrella discipline. I'd have to mull that over a little bit. But that's as far as I came. I'll see how it goes at ASPA. I know that on the panel, Jim Perry's on the panel, John Bryson, Monty Van Wart, Louise Comfort, Hugh Miller, Fran Berry. And I know that Jim Perry is preparing a 75 numbered list of the most influential PAR articles. I'm going to ask him in the panel, gosh, Jim, can you tell me which article made a difference of this listing of 75 in the real world of the decision making?